Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Over the next 20 minutes or so, David and I will try to address a question that a number of our clients have come to us with over the last few weeks. As I'm sure you're all aware, S&P and MSCI have announced a GICS reclassification across a number of sectors and subsectors. And we've had some clients reach out and ask, what does this mean for our new economy, China A ETF? What does it mean for our Asia Innovative Tech ETF? So rather than sending out a long write-up, we're trying something new. We will talk through it with a couple of slides that we've put together that hopefully you can use for whatever other purposes you might have. So what we'll cover today is what exactly is happening, and a quick overview of the changes, why we think it's important, what the impact is on broad indices, how investors might be pre-positioning, and also, of course, getting back to our world at Premia, why we don't think it has an impact, and why we think what we're doing with New Economy and Asia Innovative Tech is actually not only ahead of this, but a better way of thinking about sector classification. So with that, I'll just launch into a quick overview of what's going on. First and foremost, the changes were partially done last Friday, and the rest by MSCI are being done on September 28th. And they're really straightforward. What MSCI and S&P are really doing is acknowledging what we have all already known for quite some time, that the large tech firms are no longer just tech firms. They are moving into physical stores. They are impacting our everyday life. And in fact, most of what we do is now a digital and technology transaction rather than a separate sector. So to acknowledge this, what GICS is changing to is effectively separating the consumer tech firms from the hardware tech firms. So the first big change is that the telecommunication services sector will be renamed the communication services sector. And this sector will, in addition to telcos, will include media companies from consumer discretionary sector and home entertainment companies from IT. Think Netflix and Nintendo. These will now be part of a bigger communication services sector. The one part that's not necessarily going to change is the internet and direct marketing retail. Think Alibaba, think Amazon. These will go under consumer discretionary, as some of them already have been, but the sector will be cleaned up so that all the companies that touch our everyday shopping lives will be in the consumer discretionary space. So here what we're showing is a slightly more detailed view, and don't be confused by the complexity of the page. On the left-hand side, we're showing the current landscape, telcos, consumer discretionary, and IT sector, and all the subsectors that are impacted. And on the right, we're showing what it will look like going forward. So all three of these sub-industries from telco services will remain in communication services. The gray means the definitions are going to be changed a little bit. Consumer discretionary, advertising, broadcasting, cable and satellite, publishing, and movies and entertainment will move into communication services. And internet and direct marketing retail, some will move into interactive media and services, but the rest will stay in consumer discretionary. From IT, application software will be effectively split into two, an interactive media and services and internet services and infrastructure. Home entertainment will move into communication services, and internet software and services will also be split into communication services and information technology. So if you look at the big boxes all the way on the left and the right, what you'll see is the communication services sector is quite big. Consumer discretionary, quite a few things are being taken out, and that is shrinking. And tech, a little bit smaller, but will still remain a relatively large sector. As you'll see in a few minutes when David takes over from me. Now, the communication services sector is actually quite evenly split between its three original subcomponents. So there are stocks coming from telcos, about 33%, tech, about 40%, and consumer discretionary, about 25%. And for the more astute observers here, what you'll notice is a little bit of a problem. Consumer discretionary and tech stocks, we typically think of that as the high growth, pro-cyclical exposures. Telcos, of course, are the defensive stocks. So one big question that hopefully David will address is, okay, well, what kind of impact is this going to have on valuations of these stocks? How is this all going to look? Because we all know that sectors trade together on similar multiples. But one big change is this combination of 2/3 cyclical, 1/3 defensive, is that GICS will now officially classify the new communication services sector as a cyclical sector. So the telco defensive label will become a communication services cyclical label. And you can see across the correlations in the betas that the correlations are going from telcos minus 0.11 to basically flat, and the beta is going from 0.88 to 0.99. Now, personally, I think this is a little bit on the fence here. You could, is a correlation of 0.02 and a beta of 1 a cyclical or a defensive? Is it that different from energy? But this is the decision they've made. I think accurately reflecting that more than 50% of the sector is, of course, the more growth-oriented companies. So I'll hand it over to David now to talk through not the facts of what's happening, but the implications. What does this mean for indices? What does this mean for positioning? And what impact does it have on us in Asia? Because, of course, it's not only a US event. So, David, over to you.
Going forward, I'm talking about the impact on the overall, the world and the US, and particularly in Asia, EM, and also the China as well. So to see what is the impact in terms of the sector exposure, and also in terms of the valuation, and also whether some sector will become more defensive, and some will be going to the opposite direction. So here is the sector exposure. If we look at the all country world index, on the left hand side, you can see that the current MSCI weighting for this involved the three sector: the communication services, IT, and the consumer discretionary. And the right hand side is the performer. You can see that after the changes, the communication services will increase by 3 times, from 3% to 9%, at the expenses of the IT sectors and also the consumer discretionary. Similarly, when we look at the S&P 500, the US market, the changes is quite similar. You can see that the communication services is also increased from 1.8% to 10.1%, also at the expense of the IT sectors and consumer discretionary. So in both cases, you can see that there's a reduction in IT and consumer and go into the communication services. So the major stock involved here is an example for you to take a look. Is the FANG, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So Facebook will change from the Internet software and services under IT to become the interactive media and services under communication services. Amazon will remain the same. It's still falling under the consumer discretionary. While the Netflix will change from the consumer discretionary to the communication services under the movie and entertainment. Google will, similar to Facebook, is also changing from IT sector to communication services. So you can see that here is the top 50 members of the we classify communication services sectors here. The 15 stock involve the FANG, and also some of the other names like Time Warner, Electronic Arts, Walt Disney. All of these are coming from the IT segment and also the consumer discretionary before. So you can see that there are only 3 from telecom, the Verizon, AT&T, and also the CenturyLink. They remain similar under the carrier and also telecom services segment, belong to the telecom sector before. So if you look into this region, in particular the Asia and EM and China, the changes is even more obvious. But there is a slightly different from the world and the US. In previous case, you can see that most of the newly increased exposure in communication services is coming from the IT and consumer. But here you can see that across the Asia, EM, and China, there is an increment in both communication services and consumer discretionary at the expense of IT. So the reduction in IT is more obvious. You can see that in Asia, the IT segment decreased by 10 percentage points. In EM is by 11 percentage points. In China, it's even more dramatic. The IT segment is dropping from 36.7% to only 2.9%. So it's a very big change if you look at the impact in Asia, in EM, and in particular in China. So when we look at the beta and also the valuation, it also make a big changes. We also here is a sample from an S&P index. You can see that the beta for consumer discretionary and also communication services has increased. One is from 1.0% to 1.2 in terms of beta, and one is from 0.7 to 1. So it's increased in beta. On the opposite side, the IT has decreased the beta from 1.2 to 1.0. It's quite a big conceptual change, because a lot of people has been used to thinking IT is a high beta segment, is a high beta exposure. But now the beta itself is just similar or the same as the overall market. And when we look at the valuation, it's also a big changes when we look at the IT. Now instead of trading at a 19 times of PE ratio, after the changes, it's only 13.9 times. It's a big reduction. But on the opposite side, you can see that communication services is increased by from 14.3 to 22.6 times. The major stock involved in the changes in Asia will definitely including the BAT from China. And also we are seeing some of the stock involved like Nintendo and Yahoo Japan from Japan market, and also some of the other stock from Korea, India, and also Malaysia. So a lot of them has been changing from the original IT segment to the communication services. So interestingly, when we look at China, compared to the other market right now, it becomes the largest consumer market globally. So the consumer discretionary weighting itself account for like 21% of the overall China market. Is higher relatively than Japan, India, EM, and the other developed market as well. So it's also saying that China is more consumer-driven kind of an economy after the GICS reclassification. When we look at the China exposure at this moment, the major increasement from the consumer is coming from the IT. The dramatic change from 37% to only 3% is a big changes. Some people may ask whether it will saying that China, we look at the China market, is it become less technology involved? The answer is no. If we look at the technology right now, is running across a lot of different sectors. It can be falling into the consumer discretionary, it can be falling into the healthcare, it can be falling into the industrial. So we are seeing a lot of corporate has been applying technology in different segments. It's more integrated services and providing their products or services with the technology involvement in different segments. So that is a very interesting development, I would say. So in the next part, Alexei will help you to understand more about the impact on our products from Premia, including both China New Economy and also Asia Innovative Tech ETFs.
Thanks, David. So, David started to allude to this question and problem that I think a lot of investors will now have. China looks like it's a lot less technology. Now, that's just semantics, obviously, because we moved some stocks around. But here's a bigger problem. Many of our clients in Asia use a tech sector ETF to get exposure to the high growth part of the economy in the US and globally. And what I think investors are underappreciating is that starting October, their tech ETF is not going to have Google in it. It's not going to have Facebook in it. It's not going to have Netflix in it. And the same for Asia. It will become more of a traditional technology strategy. Stocks like Apple, TSMC, and so on. And I would be, if I were a betting man, I would guess that many clients will continue to hold technology ETFs for a few more weeks or months until they realize there's a dispersion in performance that they need to deal with. So we started thinking about this at the very beginning of planning our new economy in Asia innovative tech ETFs. We had a concern that we were not, if we simply did a tech sector ETF, we would be leaving a lot of the Chinese leading companies that are now using technology and doing the same for our Asia strategy in Korea and Japan and Taiwan. We will be leaving them out of the exposure when, in fact, more and more companies across all industries are using technology to improve their service offering. So for this very simple reason, we simply ignored GICS. We did not use GICS for either ETF. So for 3173, that's our China New Economy ETF that looks at 300 China A New Economy stocks. For those of you who remember, from a GICS point of view, that looked like a consumer discretionary, healthcare, and tech strategy. Why not only tech? Because we took a broad view of new economy and we actually used the CSRC industry classification, which goes much deeper than GICS to about 450 or so subsectors. And we identified those subsectors that require skilled talents, advanced technology, that are asset light and largely in the services industry, have sustainable growth profile and are projected to grow for the next 5 to 10 years, and importantly have policy support. Electric car manufacturing, alternative energy, environmental sectors, of course technology, e-commerce, and in China in particular healthcare. While we view it as a defensive play in the US, it's a growth area in China. We then have some screens to tilt us more aggressively toward asset light, financially healthy, accounting conservative firms that are growing their R&D and profits. But nowhere do we use GICS in 3173. And this was our first attempt where we looked to still use a sector classification system. 8 months later, when we launched the Asia Innovative Tech ETF, with ticker 3181 or 9181 if you want the USD counter, we took a completely different approach. We realized that the world is changing, that technology is everywhere, and it is not enough to simply look at which sector a company is assigned to. So we worked with FactSet using their RBICS system, which stands for revenue rather than sector classification. And there are two big differences between the RBICS, Revere Business and Industry Classification System, and the GICS system that is going through all the changes this week. First, RBICS goes to a granular level of 1,500 sub-industries. GICS only goes about 150 levels deep, sectors deep. The more important difference is that GICS is a sector assignment system, and RBICS is a sector classification system. Sector attribution system, if you will. And this is important because what we are able to do is we are able to select the innovative sub-industries from those 1,500 granular sectors, and then we can take a look at which companies generate at least 20% of their revenue from those sub-industries. So we identified 132 innovative technology industries, and we screened all the stocks in Asia for a 20% or more aggregated revenue from those industries. Ending up with about 330 stocks, which we then screen for growth and leadership. So what do I mean by 130 innovative technology sectors? This page shows you an example of how we think about innovation and technology. And you'll note the word technology or the word communication services does not appear here. The color coding is different buckets of innovation. So for example, if you look at the dark blue, 3D model printing, autonomous control shipbuilders, autonomous drone manufacturing, general factory automation, GPS manufacturing, household robotics, laser and optical instrument manufacturing, nanotechnology material manufacturing. This is a broad automation and robotics category. The orange ones are biotech. Again, we're not talking about healthcare or energy. We're not talking at a sector level. We're really looking at a granular industry, trying to figure out which companies make money from in this space and will continue to be leaders in this space down the road. An example of a company that has no changes from GICS is Nidec. It was an industrial and it will remain an industrial. But when we look at what it actually manufactures and we break down its revenue, what we notice is that 20.5% at the top right of its revenue comes from precision motor manufacturing, 10% comes from general factory automation, and 16% comes from data storage and peripherals. If you did not know that this was an industrial company and you just looked at those revenue breakdowns, you would very easily conclude that this is a technology firm. Similarly, Alibaba is in the strategy as well. It was an IT GICS sector, and it will now be a consumer discretionary GICS sector. But from our point of view, it was always that, because 84% of its revenue comes from internet department stores as an RBICS sub-industry. So it was always an e-commerce stock in our view, even though it used to be called tech by GICS and now it's called consumer discretionary. So of course, when we report the holdings of 3181, we will make the change. So we used to tell clients that from a GICS point of view, Asia Innovative Tech was 60% technology, 23% healthcare, a little bit of industrial, and a little bit of consumer discretionary. And now you can see the green bars, the names shift. Technology is only 40%. Communication services is 23%. Now I want to be clear here. Neither 3173 nor 3181 have any rebalancing happening as a result of GICS. GICS is not part of the index construction. We will on our website and in Bloomberg, we will update what GICS sectors the stocks belong to, but we're not trading at all this week because we already had effectively what we believe to be the right new economy and innovative tech exposures. And this is one of the benefits of really thinking deeply about how to construct an index to get your desired exposure for Asia innovation and Asia new economy leadership, rather than simply looking at things from a sector point of view. You can see some of the stocks on the right. They were the stocks before October, and they will be the stocks going forward. And of course, we equal weight everything, so we give all of these stocks an equal opportunity to contribute to returns. So with that, we'll conclude this quick webinar on GICS and its impact on US and Asian markets and its lack of impact on our products. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the Premia Partners team.